Good afternoon and welcome to Marketing Live for Thursday, November the 17th, 2016. I'm Rob Zinkin, your host. I serve as Associate Vice President for Marketing at Indiana University. Hope everyone is having a terrific fall semester, and I cannot wait to delve into today's topic of myth-busting websites. What prospects value about higher ed websites? Marketing Live on the Higher Ed Live Network is produced by mStoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Is it time for a website checkup? If you're worried that your site isn't memorable or nervous that your institution won't stand out from every other school that's knocking on prospective students' doors, a website checkup is your first step. We're tweeting out a link shortly where you can learn more. And thanks also to Chegg. Chegg recently published Teens Talk, an in-depth look at key influencers on college-bound teens at each phase of the college search. This research study dives into the role of digital, print, and social media have when students find, research, and engage the schools on their college lists. We'll also tweet out a link where you can download this study and where you can stay up to date on the latest research and best practices for digital student engagement. Today's live viewing experience is powered by Maestro, the premier marketing tech platform for broadcasters. Well, today's guests really need no introduction. I'm delighted to have them both here today, starting with Gil Rogers, who is Director of Enrollment Marketing at Chegg and is a recognized leader in enrollment management and marketing for higher ed. And many of us have benefited from Gil's knowledge and expertise, whether that's been a conference presentation, his published work, or research studies like the one that we'll discuss today. So Gil, thanks for joining, and thanks for all that you do to advance the profession.
Thank you for having me.
And Michael Stoner, co-founder and president of mStoner, who has served literally hundreds of institutions, nonprofit organizations, and businesses across 4 continents. Like Gil, Michael has shared his work and expertise broadly with the higher ed community. And I have always appreciated and valued the thought leadership that he consistently brings to our sector. Michael also co-edits the Call to Action blog about higher ed marketing, branding, and communications on Inside Higher Ed, and that's another tremendous resource for all of us. And Michael, always great to see you, and thanks for being here as well.
Great to see you, Rob, and join this conversation with one of my favorite collaborators.
Well, if our off-air discussion is any sign of what this episode is going to be like, and I know we're in store for an engaging and lively discussion. So before, however, we get into the myth-busting websites study, I would like to dig a little bit deeper into both of your careers and ask if you could share something that has had a lasting impact on your professional journey, whether that's a specific experience, a mentor, really anything. So Gil, let's have you lead us off.
Awesome, and yes, thanks again for having me today. We really appreciate it. Excited about the content that we're going to talk about with the Mythbusting website study. It's great to be a part of this series, encore to last year's Mythbusting admissions study, where we dove into some issues related specifically with recruitment strategies. I think so. For those that are not familiar with my background, I came to Chegg as part of an acquisition of Zinch, which was a college search website that was started a number of years back to help students with building out their college list and finding scholarships and building a profile that they can use to share with colleges and universities to set themselves apart as more than simply a test score. Prior to Zinch, I actually was at the University of New Haven in Connecticut for a number of years, where I oversaw digital and print communication, our admissions recruitment staff. And I think one of the things that draws me to doing this type of research, whether it's the Mythbusting study or others that we work on, is trying to figure out how do we get away from this chasing a shiny object perspectives of higher education. When I was in my first year at the University of New Haven, one of the things that I was tasked with doing voluntarily and then also via delegation was boosting up our social media presence. And this was the early days of Facebook, the early days of, MySpace was still around as a website that people were active and engaged on regularly. So I went out and created profiles for our institution across all of the, social networks du jour at the time. And one of the things that got us in a little bit of trouble was we created a profile for Charlie the Charger, who was the mascot for the institution at the time. And, we went out and we promoted it on campus to visitors. We had our student tour guides share with their friends, et cetera. And one day I got a friend request to my email from Charlie the Charger saying I wanted to be your friend. And I said, wait a minute, I'm Charlie the Charger. So how could that happen? So I looked at it. Somebody had created a false profile, copied exactly the same content, and was posting disparaging things. So of course I did what I felt like I needed to do as the headstrong, social media coordinator, reported that profile to Facebook thinking, you guys, you got to take this down. It's fake. And for anybody that knows, the early growing pains and challenges of having a presence on Facebook, that our profile got taken down at the same time because Charlie the Charger is not a person, right? So this was before brand pages, before groups. It wouldn't have been a big deal if we hadn't just sent a mailer to our 250,000 search names saying, hey, find Charlie the Charger on Facebook the day before the profile got taken down. So that was one of my lessons, I guess, in chasing shiny objects is really, how do we be more strategic, whether it's with our social media presence or our print presence or our digital marketing or our website. So that's what excites me about this study specifically is it gets to, and we'll talk about the data in a little bit, but the number one, marketing channel for institutions is their .edu. And how do we make sure that experience is quality for students while also not just trying to add bells and whistles just to use the latest and greatest technology. So that's what gets me excited about being here today too.
Awesome. Thanks, Gil. And Michael, something that has shaped your career path or a significant influence on your work?
Well, I actually was thinking about something else, but it just occurred to me that probably one of the most influential things I've read in the past 2 decades was Steve Krug's book, Don't Make Me Think, which was a basic book on web design published in the early 2000s. And I read it when it came out. And I think I probably have I think it's in the 2nd or 3rd edition now, so I probably have copies of each edition. But, Steve Krug's basic philosophy and his advice that he gave to people was when you're designing a website, make everything really obvious, don't obscure, don't use obscure tags for links, don't make things really complex, think about the needs of the visitor to your website, not your organization. And so when I continue to come back to that very simple, basic principle because maybe 25 or 30 years after the web was actually invented by Tim Berners-Lee, we're in a position now with websites and social media where we're trying to do all this kind of stuff and we're neglecting basic information that our visitors need and we make assumptions about their behavior and their needs that actually aren't borne out by what they do when they visit our websites and our social media. And I think that that's something that I was reminded of a number of times when we were reviewing the data from this research project and writing the white paper that will come out in a couple of weeks.
Well, thanks, and you both nicely set the table for the discussion about the white paper. And I want to acknowledge the great higher ed life partnership that exists between mStoner and Chegg, and the two of you are quite a dynamic duo when it comes to these outstanding white papers. The data is just fascinating, and you'll soon be releasing this Mythbusting websites, and I'm delighted that we get to have a preview of that here today. So to start with, is there anything in terms of context that you'd like to give for this study, whether that's previous work that has set the stage for this or anything perhaps about the methodology for this study?
Well, a couple of things that I'll say, and then I'm sure Gil has some thoughts too. Last year we did research that we called Mythbusting admissions, and what we did is we took data that Chegg had gathered from teens about their admissions journey and about the sources of information they used. And we asked similar questions of college professionals, college and university professionals, to see what they understood about what teens did and where there were overlaps and where there were gaps in their understanding. And so last year we looked at the whole admission process and sources of information. This year we decided to focus on websites. And one reason for that is that there really hasn't been a lot of focus on websites specifically during the enrollment choice and search and choice journey for a while. And so the work that we did this year builds on what we did last year. We used a similar process where we developed a set of questions for teens and asked similar, nearly identical questions to professionals to sort of get a sense of what they understood about what teens liked and didn't like. And we were really fortunate this year. We worked with Mike Hannes from Constituent Research, who managed the research piece of the project and was just a terrific partner in helping us get the project underway and analyze the data that is the result.
Yeah, and Rob, just to add to that, first, if you call us the dynamic duo, I won't put you on the spot and ask you who Batman or Robin is. We'll just assume we're both Batman. So,
fair enough.
I think what's really interesting about these studies, both Mythbusting admissions and websites, is seeing not only where there's misunderstanding, but also where there's understanding, right? I think there's anytime somebody's trying to present at a conference or present on a webinar or what have you, it's always focusing on what we don't know. And I think there's benefits to understanding what we do know and being able to really take action on those things and make sure we double down on what works while we move away from things that aren't. So I think some of what this study uncovers is, maybe there's areas we're overemphasizing because we believe it's one of those, it's because we've always said it or people always assumed it. What we're trying to uncover with these types of studies is, what are things that we say just because they sound right versus what are things that we say because they're actually true? So there's some interesting misalignments, but also some really interesting alignments as well.
I'd say one of the things that I came away last year with, and also this year, is that the more we think about the difference between what our target audience is, not just teens, and that's the research we did this time clearly, but other audience as well. What they do with their friends and as part of with members of their own social peer network is probably very different than the way they relate to brands or institutions using those same tools. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind because it helps us. It helps to remind us that it's about meeting their needs, and the more that we do that, the more successful we'll be, rather than jumping on the train du jour and grabbing onto the bright shiny object that seems to be appealing just because there are a lot of people signing up to use it, often with their friends.
Well, the way that you've structured this, and as Michael outlined, and surveying both higher ed professionals and prospective students, so we get to find out what we, as higher ed pros, what we believe teens think, but then also what they really do think. I think that's a great way to set this up. So interested to get into this, and I'll start with the fact that we think of these websites as being the most important marketing tool when it comes to prospective students. But we also know that the search process is very complicated. It's far from linear. So we assume the .edu site is the most important marketing tool, but just how important is it?
Well, I think there's some insights that were really valuable to me from Teens Talk, which is the survey that another survey that Chegg did. And I think, Gil, why don't you talk about some of those insights, because I think that they're very useful in terms of putting some context around what we did.
Yeah, and Rob, you're absolutely right. The process of the college search process is far from linear, and there's peaks and valleys that each channel, whether it's social or print or the .edu, have with respect to the influence that students the influence it has on students' decision making, perception, all of those sorts of things. So, Michael mentioned the Teens Talk study. 70% of students in Teens Talk this year said that they use the college website throughout their admissions process. So that means from discovery all the way through decision making, and that by far remains the most consistent throughout the entire process. There's others that start off really high, like college search and help sites start off as a high source, and then towards the end trickle off. And that makes sense if you think about those tools are discovery engines. Students are going to go there to find out about schools, but then the official source in many ways is going to be the website. Same with social media. Students but almost in reverse. Social media starts off a little bit lower as an influencer when students are researching schools, but ends up higher. And it also makes sense if you think about it, because when students are using social media, they're using it to find out, not to learn about the school, but learn about the people at the school, to connect with each other, with other people at the school. Is this a place where I'll fit in? Is it a place that I can really, have a good experience? And the website's going to tell some of that. It's going to empower things like virtual tours and campus maps and testimonials and information about the majors. But the social media component is what helps a student to understand how things are going to be when they're on campus. They get to look at the Instagram pictures from other students or have conversations on messaging apps, whatever it is. So there's that certain element of the importance across. I think one of the things that, and we might get into this a little bit further, is, I think one of the areas that's been talked about a lot over the years is, if you have a junky experience on your website, how big of a deal is that? And how important is it going to be on a student's, perception of the institution? And I think what's interesting is that, when we ask students about the campus or the experience on a schools.edu, it's not as high as what our respondents would do from the web developer side, thinking about the impact of a negativity on a brand. And I think there's something to be said about that. Michael, maybe you have the numbers from the marketing side, but there's this general perception of if you have a bad website, a student will cross you off their list. And I've even said that at conferences from time to time. And while it can happen, Michael too, while it can happen, it's not the website experience isn't a deal breaker. You want it to be mobile. You want it to be optimized for multiple devices. 66% of students that took this survey took it on a mobile device to finish to submit the actual survey. And we know, based on social admissions report and Teens Talk and everything else, that students are using multiple screens, multiple devices. So it does have to be responsive, mobile friendly, but a negative experience isn't necessarily a deal breaker, right, Michael?
That's right. We asked, to what degree would a poorly designed website negatively impact your opinion of that college? And only 17% of teens respondents said a great deal. So, that's fascinating to me. To what degree does a college website influence your opinion of the college? And 15% said a great deal. So about equal find it, would make a really positive influence or a really negative influence. And so I think a couple of things that I think about, in terms of reflecting on that response, is that one is it speaks to the fact that teens are using a lot of sources of information to make their decision, not just a website. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Secondly, I think that, as Gil said, the website is really important because it is the one source of information that has a high use persistently throughout their search and choice process. So they're going to the website when they're researching colleges, when they're deciding where to apply, when they're choosing the institution that they're going to accept an offer from, and when they've accepted an offer from and they're looking for information to help them make other decisions around that decision. The website is used in all those cases. So it's extremely important, but it's also one source of information that they use, and we have to keep that in mind. So you can't you can't separate the website very effectively from the other marketing that your institution does, from a reliance on word of mouth, from your social media sites, which interestingly enough, in the Teens Talk study, the website was used most persistently throughout the process to a very high level. And as Gil indicated, college official social media accounts start off pretty low, but they rise a little bit, and they're also more persistent throughout the process than other sources of information are. So all those prospective students are looking at all those kinds of inputs and taking them seriously throughout the process, and we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think just to put a bow on that, I think the website is part of your story, and it's a channel to tell your story. But there are multiple channels, and we're talking about we're talking about a generation of students that were born the year after Google, right? If you're talking about students who will be freshmen next year, right? So they're used to digital channels as their primary vehicle in many ways. So the website is one of those digital channels. It's the most persistent throughout. But it's not the only channel. So you can, if your website isn't the greatest, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, that's not as important as having viable information and a good story throughout the experience.
Yeah, that's a really important insight, and that's something that is probably one of the key takeaways from this discussion, is that the bells and whistles are a lot less important than good, solid, accurate, up-to-date information and easy to use academic and majors pages, easy to use and easy to find information on admission process and tuition, easy to use and easy to find information on what the campus is like and what students are like. And those basic sources of information, if they're up to date, if they're complete, if they're easy to use, if they give you a sense of what's happening on campus and they're authoritative, that's going to go a long way. And in fact, that's more important to teens than a whiz-bang design. Not saying that design isn't, not saying that design isn't important. That's not the point. The point is that information is really a key here.
Yeah, you guys packed a lot of great nuggets in the last 5 minutes. I do want to follow up on the point about the website experience and the impact that has on the impression of an institution, because again, as you said, we think of the website experience as one of those critical brand touch points. And so the fact that teens are a little bit more forgiving, and you made the great point that the web is just one source of information. Is there anything more to that specific finding in terms of why teens might be more forgiving than we would assume if the website experience is not an ideal one? Yeah,
I mean, I think that, and this is mostly conjecture, but it's a big part of it is probably that overall the experience on college websites is either okay or challenging. There's data that is not as part of this study, but is part of the Social Admissions Report, which is a study we publish in February each year, and year after year, it's the same thing. It's that more students find the website experience on college websites to be just okay or challenging. There aren't really that many great websites, so there probably is something to be said about because everybody's kind of average. It can't be a deal breaker. Otherwise, kids wouldn't be adding schools to their list because of their websites. That's my initial thought based on just the overall experience. Michael, I don't know if you have other.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me, and I think it's also one of the things that you did in the Teens Talk study that I think is really interesting to me, Gil, is you look at people-oriented resources, information-rich resources, and the campus tour, and look at how those kinds of resources are used during the college admission journey. And so information-rich resources are very high in the beginning of the journey because kids are doing their research, and they'll look at the College Board website, and they'll look at Naviance, and they'll look at Chegg, and they'll look at Niche, and they'll look at U.S. News and World Report, and they'll look at college websites, and they'll continue to use college websites. But what happens as they get further along in their journey, they're going to start paying more attention to people-oriented resources. And so in the beginning of their journey, if they're finding the information they need about how to apply, what tuition and financial aid is like, what the students are like, what the campus is like, which a lot of college websites these days do a decent job at providing that kind of information and make it easy to find. I remember there was a while when there used to be a lot of soul searching and gnashing of teeth among college web developers about whether one should adopt, a more common navigation set across higher ed, admissions, financial aid, that upper level navigation set that's persistent across most higher ed websites these days. And people were saying, well, our school will look different if we don't do that. That's a benefit. And I always said, no, the more common you can be, the better off you are in terms of meeting your visitors' needs. Well, in fact, higher ed has adopted those standards. It's pretty easy to find stuff these days, much easier than it was a decade ago. And to the extent that it's easy to find it at the time when students need it, that's really great. And so I think that's part of what we're hearing here. And again, this is by no means a call to not improve your website. That should be a constant effort. And we're talking about one audience too. We're not talking about other audiences. And, one of the big challenges from somebody who's been in this business longer than anybody else, really, working on college websites and web strategy. There are many audiences for a .edu site. They're much harder to develop than commercial websites. And part of the reason for that is because there are so many constituents whose needs have to be taken into account when you're designing your site.
And just a quick reminder, if listeners have a question, have a comment for Gil or Michael, feel free to tweet using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. They are ready for questions and comments. And I'm interested, you've addressed some of these items, but other things that are revealed from the study in terms of what specifically teens like about college websites, and what are some of those specific things that high school juniors and seniors say they don't like about college websites?
Well, I'd say, Gil, do you have something you want to say about that? Because I know I have a couple of things that were surprising to me, but I think are really important for people to hear. Yeah.
I mean, I think, and not to bring it back to social again, but I think one of the areas that's interesting is this the proliferation, obviously, of social media icons on websites, right? You think generally, let's put them all across the footer of the site. Let's get them out there because we want students to know we're cool and hip, and we're on Instagram, and we're on Twitter, and we're on Facebook, and Snapchat, and whatever, right? And and one thing I think you should definitely do is, and it's probably part of your Google Analytics and when you're evaluating the website, is really look at how those are being utilized. Because we know students use your website based on all the research we've been talking about for 29 minutes now. We know that students use social based on all the research and everything we've published and we've been talking about. But what's interesting is that there's not a lot of going back and forth between your website and social media, right? If a student goes onto your website and sees, the Facebook icon, the Twitter icon, those sorts of things, I think we believe that students are doing it. And that's what the survey findings indicate to us, is that we believe that students are using these things. But it's more likely that students are looking at things they're more likely going to be looking at things like college search and help sites. Probably rankings probably fall into there a little bit if you're thinking about your U.S. News icon or your college factual icon icon or whatever ranking du jour that you're talking about. We could do a whole separate higher ed live about rankings, methodologies, and all that stuff. We won't put our toes into that much today, but we tend to think that students are doing it. Over half of professionals that we surveyed said that students clicked through from their .edu to go to Facebook, and 40% said that students went from their .edu to Twitter. Even more, 63% said that students went from their website to Instagram. But students were much lower. Only 35% of students said that they went to a school's Instagram account from the school's website. Only 34% said they went to their Facebook page via the website. But if we reverse and we reverse it, we see something similar. We think that a lot of professionals think that students are coming to their website from social. That they're coming, they're coming from search sites. They're coming from help sites. They're coming from ranking sites. Not so much from social. They value both, and they value both at different times. But they're not necessarily using them as connectors, right? They're using them separately, going to them separately, and valuing them separately versus seeing them as, I think your story needs to be consistent across. But I would say one of the things you might want to look at is what are your Google Analytics say about those links? It doesn't hurt you to have those links. It's not a bad thing, but I wouldn't say that they're big drivers of engagement. They're nice to haves, and they're useful and supportive of your brand, but it's not something that 90% of students are going to click that Instagram logo just to go check out your Instagram account.
And Michael, anything else that you wanted to add on that in terms of what students, prospective students say they want from websites or what they dislike about websites?
Well, I'd say that one of the most interesting revelations for me, that was one of them, because I've been saying for years, if you've heard any of my presentations going back to 2009 or 2008, is everything is connected to everything else on the web, so make sure you make those links. And it's not, that's still valuable. And again, I think it's important to say that websites, a lot of different constituents use websites, not just prospective students. We're talking about prospective teens in our research, and I think it's important to keep reminding people we're not talking about alumni or donors or other important constituents. We're talking about teens. Mm-hmm. So having said that, I'd say that the other big revelation in the research this year was teens' reaction to the use of different kinds of media on websites. And I've written a little bit about this, but we all believe, and the data show from Pew and all sorts of national research studies, that teens are enthralled with video. They follow YouTube stars. They are morning Vine like many of the rest of us. They're live in a video first world, and that they're consumed by a lot of their media use is video. But when we ask them, how do you prefer to consume content on a college's website, 64% said that they preferred text and articles. 60% said photography. 47% said charts and infographics, and 40% said videos. So it's not to say that there isn't an interest in video, but I would have guessed, as many of our peers did, that 76% of our peers, actually, to be specific, that video would be number one, and it's not. So think about that, and think about the implications of that. And I've thought about it a lot. And when we were putting together the white paper, I was thinking about this finding and realizing that in some senses, students are a lot like I am. And my analogy was this. See if you relate to this, Rob. I'm a pretty good cook, and if I'm going to make something for dinner, I don't want to watch a video to get a sense of the ingredients that I need for when I go shopping. I want to look at a recipe and see that I need ginger, I need onions, and I need 2 chicken breasts. And I'm going to put them on my list. I'll go to the market and I'll buy them. Now, I don't do a lot of Asian cooking, so if the recipe contains some steps that I'm not too familiar with, and particularly if I'm having company, I'm going to go, I might watch a video to see how to actually execute some of those techniques. But I'm not going to waste my time in a video where I'm going to have to spend 2 minutes to find out that I have to buy a chicken breast to make this dish. I'm just not going to do it. So when you think about how prospective teens are using websites, I think they're adopting that same kind of attitude. They want to know, do you have my major? Check, I'll add you to the list. They want to know, how do I apply? Let's see, can I get in? Oh, check, I'll add you to the list. And they can get that kind of information from text and articles much more quickly than they can from watching a video. And just imagine doing that on a smartphone when you've got like maybe a bar's worth of bandwidth, which is something that kids here in Vermont have to deal with all the time. So I think that again, we're looking at an age group that is very adept at finding information, knowing how to navigate complex websites, getting what they need, and are attuned to that sort of hunting and gathering behavior. And this is a way they're demonstrating it to us.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, video acts as a good supplement, right? Again, we're not saying don't have video on your website, but have it to supplement the content that the student is actually looking for. So if a student is looking at the list and then they are confused on something, maybe there is some useful information about the application process or about registering for classes or wherever they are in the process. And that's why YouTube is so popular amongst students who are doing college research, because they probably go onto the website, they find the lists of information that they're looking for. Then when they're confused, they do what I'm not doing what Michael does and making all these great Asian dishes. I'm building walls in my basement and that sort of stuff. But I go onto YouTube to find out how to frame out the wall. They go on how to craft their essay. There's different things that students are doing. So it's about the appropriate tools at the appropriate time. Video is great as a supplemental tutorial, providing that additional insight, but replace all the information about your majors and programs by videos. Use the videos to help to tell that story.
Yeah, one of the things that we found out when we asked them is that they're definitely interested in looking at videos of faculty members, for example, but they're not going to do that when they're trying to find out if you have my major. That's something that happens further along in the process, or once they say, "Wow, I never thought about psychology. Let's see what a psychology class is like," or let's click into and see what a class here is like. Oh, here's psychology. So they will use video assets. It's not that they don't value them. It's not, but it's at a different point in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really insightful and was a surprise to me as well. And one of the other things I was surprised by was speaking of investing in video, investing in virtual tours. And again, not that a virtual tour is not important, but in terms of prospective students' perspective on that or what they find valuable, I thought that was another area that was of great interest. And if Gil, if you'd like to elaborate on that point.
Yeah, I think so. When we asked professionals, so I'll get into the myth versus reality component. The myth or reality we wanted to identify was virtual tours are way more important than campus maps, right? We think that bells and whistles. We think it's the user experience. About 40% of professionals said that teens looked at a campus map when researching colleges, as compared to 67% of teens saying that they looked at a campus map when researching colleges. So there's an area of misalignment. Now, that 67% is close to the 78%. Is close to what students are saying about virtual tours. It's a little bit higher. 64% of students said a virtual tour when researching colleges. So now it's about what's the user experience, what's the students trying to accomplish, right? And if a student wants to understand the size of the campus or where things are in relation to each other, a lot of times the map is going to be more effective in that because it's flat, it's easier to kind of just look at where things are. The virtual tour, again, like a video, is about engaging and telling a story, right? So they're close together as far as overall use, but the students' use of a campus map specifically is significantly higher than what we believe as professionals in the field students are using them for. So I think it's, again, goals before tools. What is a student trying to accomplish and do? And if it's getting a feel for the size of the campus and distance of things that are apart, where things are in relation to each other, looking at just the map overall is going to be more effective for them than taking the virtual tour. They're going to take a virtual tour at a similar rate, but it's what are they trying to accomplish there? There, it's getting that story told to them, having the little tour guide in the corner, telling them where stuff is and about the history of a building, those sorts of things that they don't get from the map. So each tool has a different process. It's about the right tool, the right time, right channel, with the right message, and that applies to maps. It applies to the content on your website. It applies to videos. It applies to all of those things.
Yeah, I'd say that when I talk about that, what I always say is that, to me, the takeaway from those questions right there is that students value campus maps a lot more than we think they do. And that was something that I just never thought about before. I just assumed that they had this really high value to virtual tours, but the fact that they value maps as highly as they do is interesting, and causes me to want to look more at what our clients are doing with maps, how they're resourcing their maps, what they're depicting on their maps, how usable their maps are. Makes me pay a lot more attention to that asset, recognizing that it is so important, that it's so important to teens in a way that I never realized before.
And Gil and Michael, was there anything else from the study and what teens said that surprised you? We've touched on some of these surprise areas, but I want to make sure we hit all of them. Any other surprises from the findings of the Mythbusting websites?
Yeah, I think those are really some of the key takeaways, Rob. As I said before, I think it's important to remember, and I keep, I think I've said this in a bunch of different ways, as we've been talking. It's important to remember as we consume all this data about what various demographic segments do, that what this demographic segment does in their personal lives, the fact that they use their smartphones and social media to develop these really strong connections with their friends. That's one thing. They don't interact with us in the same way that they interact with their friends, nor do they want to. So, in terms of the way they use websites and social media, they really value them. They're very, very important. But we have to keep reminding ourselves that we may actually not know how valuable and in what ways they value these resources we have. And we have to keep asking questions about this to make sure we're emphasizing and emphasizing the resources that they are particularly interested in, and keep refining those areas of our sites that are of primary importance to them, allocating resources appropriately. And so I think, this research just reminds me to just keep on paying attention and focusing on some of the stuff that might be a little bit more basic and a little bit less glitzy, but are way more important to this particular audience.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, the only area that I think bears worth repeating and driving home a lot is, just because a student won't necessarily cross you off your list because your website isn't great doesn't mean you should settle for average. It means that there's still plenty of improvement to do. You use the rest of the research to identify the things that you should and shouldn't be doing, or when and where they should be done. The other is mobile, right? Like I said before, 2/3 of the students who took this survey did it on their mobile device. We know based on other research studies, whether it's Teens Talk or social admissions or e-expectations or all the studies that are out there, that more and more students are using their mobile device to find and research colleges. They're not necessarily clicking that apply or submitting clicking that submit button on the application, because I don't think they want to send from my iPhone at the bottom of their essay, although that would be hilarious. It's more so, but your experience needs to be mobile friendly, responsive design, making sure that what the students are looking for and what they want to find is easily accessible, particularly on mobile, but multiple screens. I think those are the points that I think bear driving home. The rest of the research, which, as Michael mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be releasing at the American Marketing Association Higher Ed Symposium in a couple of weeks, will help to drive what pieces you implement where. But I think from my point of view, don't settle for average with design, and make sure that you're accounting for the rise in mobile and how students are accessing you on multiple screens, multiple devices.
You've both given several great takeaways throughout our 40 or 45 minutes, and just thinking as we wrap up, and marketers who are listening and thinking about this and thinking about those prospective students who are coming to their website and thinking about their teams and their work on the website, anything else that should be top of mind consideration in terms of those overarching improvements or recommendations that higher ed marketers should really be thinking about when they absorb the findings from this study?
Academics, majors, financial aid information, tuition, admission, and how to apply are really, really important. So making sure that information is easy to find, easy to digest, and easy to get through, and as complete as possible and up to date is really, really important.
Yeah, I think to say probably the same exact thing, but maybe in a different way, Michael. It's, students use your website, your.edu, to find the information they need, right? They go there to find what they need. They use the information that they can get on social media, on video platforms, search review sites, ranking sites, whatever, to find the information they want. They want to know about campus. They want to know about campus life and experiences. They want the information they need, but they're going to go to those other channels to find some of that information. So your website needs to have the core information that they need to be able to go through the application process and understand your institution. They're going to use the other channels to find out the other stuff that they want to know about, that they're not going to necessarily use your website for.
And you mentioned, Gil, that the white paper is being released at the AMA Symposium for the Marketing of Higher Education next month. And for listeners, how do they get a copy when this is released? What do they need to do?
Go ahead, Michael.
What I'll do as soon as we're done here is I will tweet out a link to a page where you can sign up. If you're not going to be at AMA, you can sign up and you'll get an email when the white paper is released, and you can get it in your inbox.
Excellent. And I'm interested, just again, with the great work that the two of you have done and continuing to do, I'm sure there's probably something else that's percolating. So anything that you might be able to share in terms of what's next, or where could you take these findings to delve into another area potentially?
Well, we're thinking and talking about what might happen next year, but we haven't made any decisions about it yet. So we're interested in ideas. If people have any great ideas they'd like to share.
Great. Well, Gil and Michael, thanks for the great work, and thanks so much for sharing the findings from the Mythbusting website study. And we're eager to see the final report.
Thank you, Rob. It's been great to join you for the show today.
And we'll look forward to seeing both of you at the AMA Symposium next month. So as always, thank you to mStoner for making Marketing Live possible. And be sure to get reminders about this and other episodes by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. I'm Rob Zinkin. Thanks again for tuning in to Marketing Live on the Higher Ed Live Network.